The makeup was perfect. Too perfect. Amanda Clark had spent 45 minutes that morning in her hotel bathroom, carefully layering concealer over the purple marks on her jaw, blending foundation to hide the fingerprint bruises on her neck, using every technique she'd learned from countless YouTube tutorials on covering domestic violence injuries. Standing at the Family Feud podium, under the bright studio lights, she looked radiant, healthy, happy. But perfection, Steve Harvey had learned over 40 years in entertainment, was often the most dangerous mask of all. The question should have been simple: name something people hide from others. Most contestants would say secrets, money, feelings, or bad habits. Easy answers that would keep the game moving and the audience laughing. But when Amanda opened her mouth to respond, her hand instinctively moved to her cheek, not to fix her hair or adjust her makeup, but to check if the concealer was still doing its job. Because underneath that flawless foundation was a roadmap of violence that told the story of a marriage that had become a prison. It was Monday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta, and the energy was typical for a taping day. The Clark family had driven 8 hours from Nashville, Tennessee, in a pristine SUV that David Clark insisted on driving despite Amanda's quiet suggestion that they could take turns. They were competing against the Williams family from Birmingham, Alabama, and the score was close heading into the final rounds. Amanda Clark, 29, moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Her dress was modest, expensive, and chosen more for coverage than style. Long sleeves in Georgia heat, a high neckline that hid more than it revealed. She smiled, constantly, laughed at every joke, and deferred to her husband in every interaction, the picture of a devoted wife. What the audience didn't know, what the cameras couldn't see, was that Amanda had been calculating escape routes since they'd arrived at the studio. Not because she was afraid of being on television, but because she'd learned to always know where the exits were, always have a plan, always be ready to run if David's mood shifted without warning. The Clark family appeared perfect on paper. David, 35, was a successful financial advisor with a commanding presence and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Amanda was a former kindergarten teacher who'd decided to focus on being a wife after their marriage 3 years ago. David's brother Marcus was charming and athletic, and Marcus's wife Sarah was bubbly and supportive. They looked like the kind of family that belonged on Christmas cards and church brochures. But Amanda knew something the audience didn't: that David's controlling behavior extended far beyond choosing the radio station on their drive to Atlanta. She knew that he'd gone through her suitcase that morning, checking every item of clothing for anything he deemed inappropriate. She knew that he'd already warned her twice about embarrassing him on national television. And she knew that the bruises under her makeup were just the latest chapter in a story that had been escalating for months. During family introductions, Steve had been charmed by their dynamic, though something felt slightly off in a way he couldn't pinpoint. David had answered most of the questions about their family, even when Steve had directed them to Amanda. When Steve had asked Amanda directly about her interests, David had jumped in with a joke about how her main hobby was taking care of me. Amanda, Steve had said, trying again to include her in the conversation, "What do you do for fun?" Amanda had started to answer, but David had placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate to the audience, but made Amanda stiffen almost imperceptibly. "She's too modest," David had said with that practiced smile. "Amanda's amazing at everything she does. Cooking, cleaning, making me look good." The audience had laughed, but Steve had noticed how Amanda's smile had faltered for just a moment. Now, in the final round, with the game on the line, Steve was asking the question that would inadvertently force Amanda to confront the secret she'd been hiding behind layers of concealer and carefully constructed normalcy. "Amanda," Steve said, his voice carrying the familiar rhythm of the show, "we need 52 points to win. Name something people hide from others." The studio buzzed with the standard energy of a close game. This should have been straightforward: money problems, bad habits, romantic feelings, family secrets. Any common answer would likely make the board and could secure the victory for the Clark family. But Amanda stood frozen at that podium, her mind racing through 3 years of hiding bruises, making excuses for David's behavior, and perfecting the art of looking happy when she was dying inside. Her hand moved unconsciously to her cheek again, pressing gently where she knew the makeup was thickest. The gesture was subtle, but Steve Harvey hadn't survived 4 decades in entertainment by missing the small details that revealed the bigger truths. Something about the way Amanda touched her face, defensive, checking, protective, triggered an instinct he'd developed from years of reading people. "Amanda," Steve prompted gently, stepping closer to the podium. "You okay, sweetheart?" The kindness in his voice almost broke her. For 3 years, she'd been surrounded by people who either didn't see her pain or chose to ignore it. David's friends who made jokes about keeping wives in line, family members who praised David's strength and suggested Amanda was lucky to have such a successful husband. But Steve's genuine concern, completely free of judgment, cracked something in the wall she'd built around her truth. Amanda looked at David, standing at the family podium with that smile that she'd learned to fear more than his anger. She looked at the audience, hundreds of strangers who saw her as a game show contestant, not a victim. She looked at Steve, whose eyes held nothing but kindness and patience. Behind the scenes, Amanda made a decision that would change everything. "I hide the bruises my husband gives me," Amanda said, and the words hung in the studio air like a gunshot. The silence was immediate and total. 300 people in the audience stopped breathing. The production crew froze. Even the cameras seemed to pause, as if the technology itself was processing what had just been revealed. At the Clark family podium, David's face changed completely. The practiced charm vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "Amanda," he said, his voice carrying a warning that everyone in the studio could hear. "What are you doing?" But Amanda was already moving her hand to her face, and this time it wasn't to check her makeup. It was to wipe it away. Steve Harvey watched in horror and admiration as Amanda Clark began removing the concealer from her jaw, revealing the purple bruise underneath. The foundation came away on her fingers, exposing the fingerprint marks on her neck. 3 years of hidden violence, visible at last. "This is what I hide," Amanda said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Every day, every time I leave the house. Every time someone asks why I'm so quiet, why I don't go out anymore, why I flinch when people move too quickly." The studio audience gasped audibly. Several women in the front row brought their hands to their mouths. At the Clark family podium, Marcus and Sarah were staring at David in shock, clearly seeing their charming brother-in-law in a new light. Steve Harvey, the man who had built a career on quick wit and perfect timing, found himself in territory where humor had no place. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a woman saving her own life on national television. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that violated every rule of television production, but honored something far more important: human safety. Without consulting producers, without following protocol, Steve did something unprecedented. He walked past Amanda to the Clark family podium and addressed David directly. "Sir," Steve said, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the entire studio, "I need you to step away from your family and leave this building, now." David's mask slipped completely. "You can't tell me what to do," he snarled, his voice carrying the same threatening tone Amanda had learned to fear. "That's my wife. She's confused. She's telling the truth," Steve interrupted, his voice like steel. "And I can absolutely tell you what to do. This is my show, in my studio, and I'm telling you to leave." Security. 2 security guards appeared immediately, flanking David. The man who had terrorized Amanda for 3 years suddenly looked small and pathetic under the studio lights, his carefully constructed facade crumbling in front of hundreds of witnesses. "This isn't over," David said, looking directly at Amanda with undisguised menace. "Yes, it is," Steve replied firmly. "It's over. Take him out." As security escorted David from the studio, Steve turned his attention back to Amanda, who was standing alone at the podium, makeup smeared, bruises visible, but for the first time in 3 years, not afraid. "Amanda," Steve said, his voice gentle again. "How long has this been happening?" 3 years, Amanda replied. And now that the truth was out, the words came easier. "Since about 6 months after we got married. It started small, pushing, grabbing, controlling what I wore, who I talked to. Then it got worse." The studio was completely silent, except for the sound of people crying. This wasn't a game show anymore. This was a moment of raw human truth, broadcast to millions of homes across America. "Why did you stay?" Steve asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, only genuine desire to understand. "Because he told me no one would believe me," Amanda said. "Because he's charming and successful and everyone loves him. Because he said if I ever tried to leave, he'd kill me, and I believed him." Steve nodded, understanding more than Amanda knew. He'd seen this pattern before, in his own family, in his community, in the countless stories that had been shared with him over the years. "What changed today?" Steve asked. "What made you decide to tell the truth?" Amanda looked around the studio, at the audience full of strangers who were crying for her, at Marcus and Sarah who were looking at her with newfound respect and understanding, at Steve who had just risked his own show to protect her. "You asked what people hide," Amanda said simply. "And I realized I was tired of hiding. I realized that maybe, just maybe, someone watching this would see that they don't have to hide either." Steve walked to Amanda, and with her permission, gently embraced her. It was the first time in years that a man had touched her without causing pain or fear. "Amanda," Steve said, his voice carrying clearly through the studio, "you just did something incredibly brave. You just saved your own life. And probably saved other lives too." But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire studio, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood the weight of this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we just witnessed something more important than any game show. We witnessed a woman choosing truth over safety, courage over comfort. We witnessed someone refusing to be a victim anymore." He paused, letting that sink in. "If you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, please know that help is available. There are people who will believe you. There are places you can go. There are ways to be safe." Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Right there on stage, he began making calls to domestic violence shelters, to legal aid services, to his own foundation's emergency assistance program. "Amanda," he said after finishing the calls, "you're not going back to that hotel room tonight. You're not going back to Nashville with him. You're going somewhere safe, where people who understand what you've been through can help you figure out what comes next." The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't celebratory applause. It was the kind of ovation that recognizes courage, that honors truth, that supports survival. As the cameras finally stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, something beautiful unfolded. Women approached Amanda to share their own stories of abuse, their own journeys to freedom. Men apologized for not recognizing the signs, for not intervening when they suspected something was wrong. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came from a teenage girl in the audience who approached Amanda with tears in her eyes. "My mom," the girl whispered, "she has bruises too. Can you help me help her?" Amanda knelt down to the girl's level and spoke words that would change both their lives. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to help her, and you just saved her life by asking." 6 months later, the episode aired with extensive resources for domestic violence victims and clear warnings about the content. The response was unprecedented. Domestic violence hotlines reported a 400% increase in calls in the days following the broadcast. Thousands of survivors reached out to share their own stories and to thank Amanda for her courage. Amanda's revelation sparked a national conversation about domestic violence, about the way abusers hide behind charm and success, about the importance of believing survivors and providing them with resources and support. Steve's foundation partnered with domestic violence organizations across the country to create emergency assistance programs for survivors. The Amanda Clark Freedom Fund now helps dozens of women each year escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. But the most important change was in Amanda's life. With the support of counselors, legal advocates, and a network of survivors, she rebuilt her identity as something other than a victim. She returned to teaching, working with children who, like her, had learned to hide their pain behind perfect masks. Amanda still has the makeup compact she used to hide her bruises, but now it serves a different purpose. It reminds her of the woman who was so afraid of the truth that she spent hours each day burying it under layers of concealer. And it reminds her of the moment when she chose courage over concealment, truth over safety, freedom over fear. The question that terrified Amanda, name something people hide from others, became the question that freed her. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can hide is your own pain. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the world see your scars. The battered wife's bruises weren't just marks of violence. They became symbols of survival, proof that some truths are too important to hide, and reminders that courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you tell the truth anyway.